Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, Designing Secure and Private Software by Default. I'm Dwayne McDaniel. I'll be your host today from the GitGuardian side, and we'll introduce our co-host and our speaker today in a little bit, but this is a co-presentation by GitGuardian and devici. And to get things going, we want to say congratulations to Nitin Krishna, who was our prize winner from last month. We are going to give away some prizes through here, and you can qualify for these prizes by participating in our polls or asking questions. And we have 2 polls coming up a little bit later. But to get you used to using the interface and to start typing a little bit and just get you a little more active than just sitting there passively, we're going to go ahead and ask you, where are you coming from in the world? I'm in Chicago, Illinois. Chris, where are you located?
I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina.
So there we go. Raleigh, Chicago, we're already in multiple time zones and just from our end. So go ahead and use that chat. Just tell us hello. Tell us where in the general world you are. And I see some Dallas, Turkey. Oh, wow. We got people from Canada, India, Luxembourg. Oh, Luxembourg. Nice. I love Luxembourg. Well, without any further ado, while you're all typing and getting familiar with yourselves, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, Chris Romeo. Chris is the CEO over at devici. Why don't you go ahead and just give us the quick high-level introduction to yourself, your background, and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, sure thing, Dwayne. So Chris Romeo, I've been in the world of security for multiple decades. So I think I'm 26 or 27 years at this point, and I got a chance to start in cybersecurity before it was even really a thing. So back in 1997 is when I got my start. But I've had a chance to do almost any job you can imagine within the world of cybersecurity, from security consultant to government trusted product evaluator to traveling security consultant to director of incident response. And about 12, 13, 14 years ago, I kind of found my niche inside of application security. And so I spent 11 years at Cisco, focusing on helping develop Cisco's SDL, Security Development Lifecycle. And then from there, I founded a company called Security Journey that still exists today, focuses on security education for developers. We sold that company in 2022. I retired for 2 weeks. I don't recommend it. It's terrible. It's a terrible experience. But after 2 weeks, I had to get back to work and find something to do. And so threat modeling has always been a passion of mine for my entire career. And so I've had a lot of ideas that I've been saving up for how to build a platform that helps you perform threat modeling. And so that's what devici is. It's a threat modeling platform that helps developers and really anybody that builds anything inside of your organization to easily perform the threat modeling process, figure out what the challenges are, and mitigate those challenges in anything that you build. And so a couple more things. I love to do podcasts. So I'm up to 3 podcasts that I host: the Application Security Podcast, Security Table, and the Threat Modeling Podcast. And then I also do a newsletter that you'll see here, Reasonable Application Security. Each week I put out 5 articles that caught my attention, as well as some kind of snarky commentary. Is kind of what I'm known for there. So, Dwayne, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
We do love the snark around here, Chris. I know I personally do. So we're just going to dive straight in. So the name of this webinar is Designing Secure and Private Software by Default, which leads me to a question of, if we've known about this for a while, if we've been thinking, and because we all hear it, we need to be more secure. We need to think about these things earlier. And we've been saying this for, well, the entire time I've been in security. Why haven't we solved this yet? Why are we still seeing so many breaches out there?
That is a great question. And it's a question I think I've been pondering for my entire career at this point. Like, why am I not out of a job? It's what I ask myself all the time, right? Because, like I said, I started in 1997. It seems like we should have solved these things, and I should be moving on to a beach or something somewhere because there's no more security challenges. There's a couple of different angles to understand why I think we sit where we are today. The first one is we just haven't built security and privacy in from with anything that we've built over the last decades. And what I mean by that is security is still not getting the right amount of attention from the very beginning. And privacy. It's so easy to forget privacy. I didn't even include it in that last sentence, right? But it's really about security and privacy. And like when you look at this picture of this Gothic building, I love to use this structure as an illustration, because if you look at the depth of construction here and the height of this thing, the width of it, it's a masterpiece of construction. But imagine within this structure, there's various bad or weak components in the roof, and the walls weren't engineered properly so that they start to cave in. And so if you didn't build this structure with a plan from the beginning to ensure that it wasn't going to fall over, it would literally fall over within 10 years. And most of the structures like that we see in the world still exist today because they were engineered well. They had a plan from the beginning about how we're going to build this thing so it doesn't fall over. That's the key to security and privacy by design and default, and that's what we've been missing, and that's why we still have data breaches, we still have vulnerabilities, we still have issues. And yes, we will have these things forever. Okay, we're never going to reach the point where security and privacy are done. So for all of us that are security and privacy people, good luck. Good news for us, because we have job security for life, because this is never going to end. The threat actors continue to get better. New attacks come out. People wake up in the morning and decide that they're going to break things for a living, and they're not going to get an honest job. They're going to find ways to steal money from people. And so that's human nature, right? And so human nature drives where we sit from the threat landscape for both security and privacy. But for me, it comes down to we didn't build the foundational pieces from the very beginning, and that's why we sit in this challenge that we find today.
So with that, we're going to open it up for our first audience poll. I got to go pull the button to say publish that one. Have you worked anywhere? Let's see. How do I make it live? There we go. Publish poll. All right. You should see a poll in the poll section now that you can interact with. Have you worked anywhere that has suffered a security breach that you're allowed to talk about? Go ahead and click your answers there and submit your votes, and we will you should be able to see that. If someone can confirm for me out in the chat that is working as expected, I'd love to see that. All right. Yep, it's working. Thank you very much, Hung. Hung, one of our security champions around here. All right. Well, as you're answering that was a lot to chew on there. I 100% agree with you. That's one of the beautiful parts about visiting Europe, in my opinion, is you see so many buildings that were so well thought out, so well constructed that they're still there hundreds, thousands of years later. But they had a plan to begin with. And I think that is definitely something we've been missing, at least in the DevOps world, where we made it work. We just made it work first. And that was the key thing, just push it out the door. The good news, though, is this isn't all doom and gloom. You have a path forward for us, and that's literally why we're here. I mean, yes, we're never going to get to 100% airtight everything unless we bury our boxes in concrete, and then we're not available. But this approach makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm just going to let you talk here a while. But what do you mean by secure and private by default?
Yeah, so it is helpful to level set with a definition before we go too deep into this pool here. And so when I think about secure and private by design and default, it's really made up of two different things. It's an art, but it's also a science. And so when we say it's an art, that means there's some creativity that goes into designing things well. If there wasn't, it'd be no fun to be an architect or a developer in the world of technology. If all you did was take cookie cutter patterns and put them together, that doesn't sound like it's that interesting to me. But a true designer is an artist, but also a scientist, in that there are those prescriptive patterns that we can use. So when we think about secure and private by design and default, it's the art and science of prioritizing, as you might imagine, security and privacy from the time we start building something that reasonably protects devices, data, and applications against security threats. Don't sleep on that word that's there. And I adapted this definition from CISO. And CISA used the word reasonably in this. And so I fell out of my chair the first time I read it because I'm like, a U.S. government publication used the word reasonably in regards to something with security and privacy. Like, I can't imagine I can't believe that just happened. But it's why I named my newsletter the Reasonable Application Security, because it's such a great concept. And what does it mean that something's reasonable? It means that we don't have to protect everything that like it's critical data classification. There are going to be some things that are low priority from a data classification perspective, and it's okay to not apply every possible security control on the planet to protect something that doesn't have a lot of value as a piece of data. So I love that they put reasonably in there. But then I like to think of this in two other ways as well. This is a philosophy. This isn't a set of requirements, and this is definitely not a compliance standard, what I'm about to share with you here. Kind of an anti-compliance person. But it's a philosophy. It's a way of thinking. It's a way that architects and designers and developers can build things, but can also think about security and privacy in a way that doesn't cause them to have to spend months and months of their lives designing. This is also a journey. I like to think of it as a journey of outcomes. This is not something that's going to happen. You're not going to achieve secure and private by design and default tomorrow, next week, next month, maybe not even by next year. But it is something that you can start on this journey. And 5 years from now, you want to be able to look back and say, hey, our organization is building things that consider security and privacy well, so that we build a structure that has sound walls and a sound roof. That's really what our goal is here, is going on this journey as an organization.
So let's dive into some more of the specifics and how to think about this in big picture. And this is where I'll invite the audience to start using that question box. Chris would prefer to ask questions relative to the section we're going through rather than holding them all off to the end. So let's do that. But I think the big picture here, there shouldn't be too many questions. I think we all should be in general agreement with what you just said. I love this messaging of not a destination. It's an ongoing journey that will be on literally forever. But let's go through some core tenets here.
Yeah, so when I think about the core tenets, or what are the pieces that define secure and private by design and default, it starts by having a holistic security and privacy approach. What I mean by that is security and privacy need to be a part of everything that we do within the context of building something. And we've been saying this for decades about how you're not supposed to bolt it on. You're supposed to build it in. You're supposed to shift. I'm not even going to go with that one. But holistic security is about how do we apply this thing to every decision that's faced inside of the product, inside of the application. And then the second tenet here is this is about business priorities, not technical features. I see organizations where they still get wrapped up of, well, security and privacy are features, and we need to add these features, and they need to be prioritized against the other features. No, these are business priorities now. The third thing, it's about having a mindset shift to protection over new features. There may be a time in the life cycle of something that you build where you have to say, we're going to hit the brakes on building new features because we have not done a good job with security and privacy. We need to spend a series of sprints fixing security and privacy problems that we did not design for well. And so that's a mindset shift, though, because the business is always pushing, saying, features, features, features. Customers want features, which is true. But customers also want things that properly take care of security and privacy. And then the last core tenet here of secure and private by design and default is we just have to build features in a default, secure, private state. That's our ultimate goal, is to get to this point where you build a new feature, it has properly been secured, it has properly considered privacy, so that when you start to chain these things together, that's how you build an overall architecture that really respects both of these things. So when we think about the forgotten challenges, it's good to be a realist. And I always try to be a realist. That's part of being reasonable. And so we want to just remember that actions we take today, if you work in an organization that builds products and applications for customers, whether it's SaaS, whether you're building an actual product, physical product that's being sent to people, the actions that we take today really impact 6 months in the future, 1 year in the future, 2 years in the future. So timelines are a challenge of implementing secure and private by design and default. Retroactivity, if we only had a time machine, we could travel back in time to when the person who had this idea for this company that you work at now, and you could just whisper to them, security and privacy are going to be important, build for them. And then you travel back to the future and you're like, look, all of our products are perfect from a security and privacy perspective. That's not the reality of how the world works. We have things that have been built over the last number of years. It's going to take time to fix the sins of the past in the things that we've built. And then I would say the last forgotten challenge is really on the purpose side. And what that means is that the business exists to sell product and make money. The business doesn't exist to do security and do privacy. And so there's always going to be some tension there because the business does need to send new features out. Because if you don't send enough new features, customers go to competitors and start buying other things, and you don't have customers, you don't have a company because you don't have revenue. So there's just these forgotten challenges are good to keep at the top of our mind. It's not just we're going to lay down the law that this is what we're going to do starting now, and we're not going to do anything else. We have to consider that actions today impact the future. We've got things that already exist that we're going to have to retroactively update, and the business does exist to make money.
I love that approach. It reminds me of that saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you're going to have all the fruit you want. That just means you're going to have a tree, hopefully in the future. But yeah, remembering the business, security should be empowering the business, not just securing the business. But yeah, that's empowering as well.
It's a partnership there. So that takes us to the results of all that I've seen, and a lot of it coming from CISA. And I don't mean to be mean. I'm not trying to pick on CISA. But there's always a but at the end when somebody says something like that. But I'm about to do it. What I found in looking at this idea of security and privacy by design and default is nobody has documented how to implement it, how to systematize it, or how to make it a reality within a technology product. So CISO's put out all this guidance. They have the secure by design document. They have flash alerts. They have websites. They have people going out and talking at Black Hat and other places about it. But it's all about, here is this idea. We all think it's important. And here is just a list of 100 different things you could possibly do that could have a positive impact on meeting this idea of being security and embracing security and privacy by design and default. There's no implementation to it. And that's what got me to these slides and to this talk is we need a way to put this into a series of steps so people can apply this and do it for the things that they build. Having a pledge that a bunch of people signed at RSA that just happened to take place during my RSA talk on this topic. A pledge doesn't really mean anything at the end of the day. We need implementation. And that's what I'm here to solve for us is how do we implement this idea of security and privacy by design and default?
I think that's where a lot of the disconnect comes because nobody disagrees that we need security. Privacy is important. It's the how do I get there from here is I think where everyone's really struggling out there. So that's why I'm very glad you're here. And that's what I'm specifically asked. So what should we do?
Yeah. So I've put together via this research that I've done really a 4-step process. If you go to the next slide, we've got an example of this that will show people. And so if I try to implement this concept, for me, it starts with design decisions. And so I'm going to take you through some examples of that in a second. But there are a number of design decisions that you can look at if you're building something new from scratch. Yes, I'm a realist. I realize that most of the things that you're working on, you can't build from scratch. You can still look at these design decisions and understand them better, and then find ways to retroactively apply them to applications and products and things that are going to live on. The second step for me is creating a data flow diagram. Data flow diagram is the core tenet of a threat model in the way that I like to do threat modeling. It's a way of drawing a picture of how the feature, the subsystem, the application, the product, whatever level of abstraction you're at is going to work. And it is ultimately your design. So you're taking these design decisions, asking these questions about what you're going to build. The data flow diagram is let's draw a picture. Picture's worth 1,000 words is a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's a real statement. It makes sense. To look at something is easier than to listen to me do a 10-minute explanation of how it works. And the third part is we have a series of patterns that can be applied. We don't need to recreate the wheel for everything. And I'll take you through a series of those patterns and show you how they come together. And then the last piece is checking the work. For me, this is threat modeling. Threat modeling is the vehicle that we use to evaluate the design decisions, evaluate the design we've come up with, evaluate the patterns we've applied, consider what are the threats that could influence this particular design, but then most importantly, what are the mitigations that we can use to eliminate, to the best of our ability, the impact of those threats. And so this is really the high level flow for implementation. And if we go to the next slide, we can dive into the design decisions in more depth. And so this is really the meat.
Point out before we get there, go back a slide, that it does circle back. It's not a linear, you're done. It is the things you learn from checking the work should be implementing or should be influencing that next cycle through. And I really like that. Just wanted to point that out. But that's
it's a good point. It is, Dwayne, you're right on there. It is designed to be an iterative process because products, applications, they continue to be iterated upon until they reach end of sale, end of life, and then they are decommissioned, right? But yeah, I like to think of things as iterative all the time because we are never done. We're never done with the threat model that we've built. So let's unpack these design decisions that I have here for you. And so I'm just going to dive right into the first one, a security and privacy enforcing stack. So what do I mean by stack? A stack is the language, the libraries, the components, the things that you're connecting together to build your solution. Because we live in an open source world where we just don't build or write a lot of code from scratch. We take component pieces and we push them together and we build an application, we build a product. And so that's what I mean by stack. And so what's the decision that we have to make here? Well, we've got to choose architectural components that enhance security and privacy. So a list of these. What language are we going to write this application in? Are we going to use a memory safe language like Go or Rust? Or are we going to use something like C and C++? And C is probably the worst offender that doesn't have memory safety built in. And so we do have to choose a language. We want to choose a language that is memory safe. C#, Rust, Ruby, Go, Java, Swift. These are all memory safe languages and are all good from this perspective. What framework are we going to use? Nobody writes JavaScript front ends from scratch anymore. Now, somebody probably does somewhere, but it takes them a lot of time to do it. Like you use React, you use Angular, you use, there's 10 different frameworks that are available out there. Which one's going to be part of what you're building? What are the security and privacy things that they've done to move that framework forward? And we've got database. How are we going to store? What data are we going to store? Do we have a database that has any inclination or notion of privacy? Does it have features that will allow us to do row-level encryption, for example? These are decisions we need to make. And then what about the hardware and cloud that we're going to use? There are some cases where if we're building a product, we're going to have a hardware base. If we're building a SaaS solution, we're likely going to have a cloud provider. What protections are available from those solutions and which ones are we going to use? But really, the takeaway from this first one, the strength of the stack dictates the security and privacy ceiling. If you make the wrong decisions from the beginning, you're setting yourself up for a big failure. Second one's the security and private user experience. You're looking at this now, you're like, did he really put user experience at number 2 on the list here? Yes, I did. It was very much by design. Because user experience and user interface designers, these are brilliant people that can really help us in the product development process that we go through. But we have to get them thinking about security and privacy as well and being our advocates or our champions from a user experience perspective. Because we want to adopt a secure and private user experience for our ultimate end user. And so from a security perspective, what are we thinking about here? Well, we want to have simple, non-disruptive user flows, especially when a user is working with a security feature, because we are known for creating security features that are hard to understand. I mean, you can get mad at me about it, but it's the truth. It's the reality of our industry, what we build. We need to build things that are more simple for people to understand. We got to balance security and usability. We have to ensure that we have a consistent experience. If we have multiple applications, we should have a consistent experience across them, and clear and helpful error messages. How many times have you seen an application turn up an error 104, gobbledy blobbity doobity blah blah blah? It doesn't say anything. It doesn't tell us, and that's a good user experience. You have an error condition. The user should know right away what caused it and what can I do to fix it. That's how security fits in. What about from a privacy perspective? Well, user experience folks are looking at a lot of ways that data is moving around the system and how it's being displayed. What if they could be thinking about transparency of data use and how it's being stored? What if they could be thinking about personal versus corporate data, or balance between functionality and privacy protection from the user interface side? The third one is protect PII and customer data. So we need a policy to do this. That's what we're trying to come up with. How are we going to minimize what data we store? How are we going to encrypt it? How are we going to anonymize it when we can, so that we don't have a tie back to who the user was because we don't need it? And even a de-identification, which is a higher level privacy principle. But is there a way that we can mask the actual user in such a way that we can still know it was from a particular user, but not who that user ultimately was? You can only protect what you know and understand here. And so we have to understand the data so that we can design for it better. The fourth one is just lock it down. How are we going to lock down this solution? How are we going to be secure by default without ever doing hardening? I hate this idea of hardening. We should never have to harden anything. We should build it so that it's hardened out of the box. How are we going to limit the attack surface to remove interfaces? How are we going to deprecate unsafe legacy features in the things that we've already built? The fewer interfaces we have, the easier it is to secure the system. The fifth one is responsibly use open source. So this one you're looking at, you're like, duh, this is kind of what everybody's been talking about for 5 years at this point. But it is a design decision we need to consider. How are we going to have a strategy and a policy to use open source, and we're going to enforce it? How are we going to enforce choice of open source? Are we going to use a proxy to control people can choose, or are we going to let people do whatever they want? How are we going to determine the trust of an open source component? How are we going to incorporate software composition analysis into our build pipelines to ensure we're not releasing something that has a known vulnerability that we could fix? And then how are we going to review open source to understand how particular components impact privacy? Yes, software supply chain security is simple on paper, but it's challenging in the real world. That's why we have to design for it. The sixth one is just detect and mitigate issues in code. How are we going to adopt existing code, review, and tooling standards for automated checking or building things from scratch? We're going to use secure coding standards. We're going to use privacy coding standards. No one's ever created a privacy coding standard as far as I know, but we need to. We should be giving developers guidance for how they interact with data to ensure they protect privacy. And then we got to have secure private code review policy and process. And then we need SAST for both a security and privacy perspective, software application and security testing. So we can use tools. That's my takeaway on this one. You can use tools to provide a check and balance against your design decisions. So making a good design decision is the first step. But we want tools. We want to trust but verify. That is still the best possible way to build something. And then the last one, number 7, dealing with vulnerabilities. How are we going to deal with issues when they're found? What are our remediation, service level agreements? How fast are we going to get things turned around? And how are we going to be transparent with the issues that have been found in our products, our applications? This means we're going to have product vulnerability management standards. We're going to publish an SBOM for transparency purposes to let people know what's in our solution. Transparency is really a big driver for customers. They just want to know what is the risk in using your solution. So anything you can do in a controlled manner to be transparent with them is a positive step forward. Dwayne, I know this is a lot of design decisions we just went through, but
A lot of stuff. I was just about to say, I think each one of these points could have been its own webinar. Maybe we'll make one in the future for each of these, but definitely some good stuff here. And we have a question that I think sets us up for the very next part, and that is from Jeremy out there. Thanks, Jeremy, for the question. How to start when development teams have no interest in cybersecurity? Even just having an AST solution integrated is an issue to them. And I think that's about what you're going to talk about next.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the question is probably more complex than that. This, what I'm talking about with guardrails and paved roads, is a potential path forward. But when you have a culture like that where people are just really pushing back a lot, it just means you've got a lot more foundational work to do. And that could be coming in and trying to find the people that don't hate security and try to create a security champions function, and then use them as the gateway to getting security to be perceived better. That question by itself is its whole own webinar right there about how do you create a positive security culture. But to your point, guardrails, paved roads, and patterns are ways that you can provide a better solution for developers that they won't hate maybe so much. But there's unique distinctions between these three things. And so let's unpack what a guardrail is versus a paved road. And so a guardrail, what we mean with a guardrail is we're going to set some edges, some gates on the side of the mountain so that developers don't go off the road and go off the side of the mountain with what they're doing. But we're going to give them freedom within that space to be creative, to be innovative, to do whatever they want. A guardrail could be something like an AST solution, right? It's enforcing a set of rules, and if you do something outside of what those rules prescribe, you're not allowed to commit that code. Now, a paved road is where we provide a solution that solves a security or privacy problem, and it's plug and play for the developer. And that's really the key, Jeremy, to what you're trying to figure out here. If you can create security controls in such a way that as a developer, they can integrate that solution without doing a lot of work, then that's really the key. And I'll give you an example. This is from an application security podcast episode that I did with Mukund Sarma from Chime. Chime's doing a lot of innovative things in the world of AppSec right now, really pushing the envelope. And so Chime created this authorization library. But the cool thing about this authorization library is a developer could add a YAML file with like 3 or 4 lines in it when they created a new microservice. And that in that 3 to 4 lines, they could define exactly what the access policy should be for that microservice. And so the developer can literally spend 5 minutes thinking about access control, and all the rest of it's done for them. The whole library exists and makes it work. And so that's the example of a paved road right there. It's breaking down the wall between the development team and security team by giving them a function or a feature that they can just plug and play, and they don't have to do a lot of thinking about it, and it doesn't take a lot of their time. And so that's a perfect example of a paved road. And so that would be my advice, Jeremy, is start thinking about what are the guardrails that you can use to give people innovative space and check the things that they're doing, but also what are the paved roads that you can provide for them that'll make it easier for them to apply security and privacy controls without doing any extra work, that's really the key there. And so when I talk about patterns for me are really paved roads, but a pattern is a little higher level than a paved road. Paved road is like an implementation of an access control. Let's go through a couple different patterns here, and I'll show you, I'll give you kind of a quick high level description of what these things are and how they can be applied. So some of these, you're going to look at this and you're going to go, once again, you're going to go, duh, like, of course you need to do these things. But we need to have this list so that we have something we can go through and check and make sure we're doing all the right things and we're applying the right patterns. And so the first one, authentication multi-factor. I feel like we're approaching point in our industry where this is just going to become the default, which is great. I mean, I've lived through the years of password 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And having single factor authentication resulting in data breaches and all kinds of other problems and whatnot. So authentication multi-factor is a pattern where we just apply some type of identity and access management solution, which outsources the authentication away from whatever it is you're building to some other trusted, battle-tested, and hardened platform that does the authentication, and we just plug into it. Same thing with access control and authorization. We shouldn't be building access control and authorization into anything new that we have. We should be using an existing solution so that we're using a standard approach to this across all the things that we build. The third pattern is performing validation, sanitization, and encoding. And so we want to have a standard way to validate input when it comes in, and then to sanitize and encode output when it goes out. Yes, SQL injection, cross-site scripting. This is the answer to those types of attacks, is having a solid solution of checking the data when it comes in and sanitizing it and encoding it when it goes out. That's why we need this as a pattern. Pattern 4, secure logging. We need data of what's happening inside our systems. And so many applications I look at these days, they just aren't doing secure logging from the very beginning. And as somebody who was a director of incident response and an incident responder for a number of years, when I come to your incident and ask you where the logs are and you say, well, we didn't really build those in, you know what my answer is? I can't really help you because I don't have any data about what happened on your system. I mean, it's ephemeral. It's all disappeared and gone. Pattern 5, proper password storage and initiation. So if we are going to have passwords that are part of our solution, we have to store them well. We have to have a way to set them up and reset them and enforce long password controls and stuff on them so that credential stuffing and password guessing and brute forcing is something that just no longer exists in our world. And that also goes together with multi-factor. And then data protection. How are we going to apply a encryption and key management to the databases that we have? Like, how are you going to provide me as a developer a database solution that uses encryption well and it has key management wrapped in and secret storage and all that type of stuff done well in such a way that I don't have to really think about it? I just say that I need this microservice needs a new database. I push a button, boop, 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 boop. I have a new database that is encrypted, that has key rotation and key management, and is the secrets are not something that I could even expose in my code if I wanted to, because I'm using an interface to secret storage. And the last pattern here is just scalability. How are we going to build this thing in such a way that we have orchestration and then high availability? Because while DDoS seems to have gone by the wayside, for the most part, it does still pop up now and again, and people are still able to generate terabits, I should say, of capacity heading towards a site. So we do need to have a pattern of scalability that I, as a developer, don't have to think about. I just get it in the way that we deploy software. We deploy in Kubernetes and we scale horizontally and vertically. I don't have to think about it. It's just a pattern that's been provided for me. And so, Dwayne, these are just the different patterns that you put these together with the design decisions, the data flow diagram, and then the patterns. And now we've got something that has a solid foundation.
That's awesome. I really want to isolate that sound effect you made and start using that as a Slack bot. Every time I do something successful, I want that do sound. That was my big takeaway. No, this is all really good stuff. And stuff that we should be assessing throughout our processes. Moving on, we got a few questions, but I think they'll be better fit for the end. So let's just move on to the next piece. All right. So how do we check the work? What do you mean?
Yeah. So now we've just to recap where we've been here, right? We've talked about a series of design decisions we have to make going into building something or retroactively applying to something we've already built. We have to create a data flow diagram to describe or to give us a visual representation of this thing that we're building. We've got a series of patterns we need to apply. We put all these things together and that becomes our design. Now we've got to check the work. We've got to check how well this thing comes together and how strong it actually is. And so for me, checking the work is threat modeling. And it's really going through this process of looking at the data flow diagram and saying, what are all the possible security and privacy challenges that could happen, and how are we going to mitigate them? And so here's a couple of tips for folks to making this a reality and making it something that's very useful and something that's provides good results. You got to start with a functionally diverse team. I've done threat modeling where I get a bunch of developers together, and it's great. We find issues, we mitigate things, but they all tend to be very developed from the developers' kind of rose-colored glasses. It's from the developer's viewpoint, and developers think about the system in a certain way. But if I bring a product manager, if I bring say I've got testers still, if I bring testers to the table, if I bring architects, if I bring user experience, they look at the system differently. They see different threats than what the developers see because they have a different perspective. They have a different background. They have a different set of experiences, and they bring that to the table. And so finding inspiration within Stride LM and the walls of OWASP is these are sources that you can use to extract threats. Because one of the big challenges people have with threat modeling is they start and they say, I just don't know what the problems are. And that's one of the things that we've done at devici is we focused in on how do we give you a platform that helps you, that provides you what we call a codex or a database of all the different threats. And so Stride LM is really where I start these days. Stride being spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. That will be on the test, by the way, just for people that like to worry about the test. And then LM is lateral movement. So that's a recent, last couple of years adjustment. But Stride LM is a mnemonic that helps you think through a catalog of various threats. And this is what I always tell people to start with. If you're using Stride LM as your primary way of thinking about threats 5 years into threat modeling, you haven't moved forward enough. But it's a great place to start because it keeps it simple. And that's really the key to being successful at anything. You make something complex, nobody ever wants to do it, and they just say it's too hard. But you can also look within the walls of OWASP. So OWASP Top 10 for web, for API, for LLM, for CI/CD. There's all of these different OWASP Top 10 lists of application security risks. But you can use those to extract various threat data, which is what we've done with the devici Codex, our database. A couple other things to think about here. How do you brainstorm beyond the patterns? So the patterns are the ultimate mitigations. And that's why I said mitigations are really all that matter coming out of this. But brainstorming beyond the patterns is really saying, how am I gonna look at this design and just really think out of the box? And that's why I always say with threat modeling, there is no such thing as an impossible threat. Every threat is possible. Now, the likelihood of it may be very, very unlikely that a meteor is going to hit the data center where you're running your application. But it's still possible. You can't tell me it's impossible because we know there's meteors flying all over the place. And I use that as a way to say, we don't want to shut any ideas down. So threat modeling is a brainstorming process. Yes, we can use a mnemonic to help us get going on it, but it's really about collaborating with multiple people together and bouncing ideas off each other. And that's why I say brainstorm is important, and don't ever shut somebody down. Don't ever look at somebody in the threat modeling process and go, or don't let anybody do this. Don't let somebody say, that's not possible. No, because it shuts down the brainstorming process. Maybe it's unlikely, but it is possible. And just to close the thought there, I mean, mitigations are all that matter. And so you're using threat modeling to check the work of these previous steps. And then you're looking for, what do we need to adjust in the design that we just missed in the design decisions and applying the patterns? And you modify the data flow diagram. And that's what, to Dwayne's point, that's what makes that iteration of design happen.
We did have a question related to threat modeling itself from Jeremy out there.
Okay.
Is there such a thing as application threat modeling that only focuses on the software itself versus a more global threat model?
Yeah, definitely. So the way I like to think about threat modeling is and how we scope it comes from a good friend of mine, Izar Tarandosh, who he and Matt Coles have written what I think is the best book on threat modeling right now. If you Google their name or look on Amazon, you'll find them. But Izar's point is threat model every story. that's how you get to the point where you have an architecture, you have those foundational layers apply, you've applied security and privacy to them. And so that's when you say application threat model, I think about threat model every user story, because that's, and granted, some user stories are going to be change the color of the border to blue. That's very easy to threat model and say, there's no threats, new threats being introduced by changing the border color to blue. Next, and you move on, right? Now, when I think about a global threat model for me may include the application. It may include the cloud pieces on a different canvas, is the way we like to think about it at devici, is multiple canvases or layers of the threat model. I may have a kind of a individual feature threat models. I may have an architecture threat model, and then I may have a cloud threat model, just because the cloud environment, I can kind of model what services and things that we're using and think about the threats that are applied to them outside the context of a given feature that I'm building. So all of that to say, long answer to a short question is think about threat model every user story is the way that you get to the app, to apply the application threat model. But there is also value in that what you referred to as a global threat model, where you're looking at different levels of abstraction within the thing that you're building.
See, we are starting to run out of time here, but we did have one more poll for you for all of those 100+ people that are still online with us. We'd like to know if you're currently doing threat modeling in your organization. So let me publish this poll out there. If you go to the poll section, it should be live right now. Yes, start modeling. So there's your options. So we would love to hear from you. Just circle back from earlier, a massive 31, so 44% said they did not think they've been breached. But the majority said either I think so, yes, or yes, and it was directly because of leaked secrets. So thank you for your participation there. But again, for sake of time, while you're all answering that question, let's move on to maybe the most important, but also one of the trickiest things in all of security, measuring what matters. Like Lord Kelvin said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it.
Yep.
So how do we measure all this?
Yeah, I think the way that we measure this is, I'm a big dashboard fan. I like dashboards that have metrics and data, because once we can see the data, we also get the advantage of people kind of want to be at the top of the leaderboard amongst their peers. People have a drive to get there. But I think a customized dashboard is a good way to measure how we're doing across an entire organization. And I think what we do there is we summarize our design decisions and our patterns for each application or product. And I like to think of this idea about using 0 and 1, just to keep this simple. And so if I'm going to make a dashboard, I want to be able to report on an individual project that we're working on across my design decisions. And all I'm going to do is put a 0 if we've applied that design decision, or if we haven't done anything with it, or 1 if we've applied it. One of the challenges with metrics and measuring things is, once again, people don't keep it simple, and then nobody can explain what that number is that spits out at the end of the equation. And so I think if we keep this simple and we just make a dashboard, we assess the things that we're working on, and we look at the design decisions and the patterns. And I should have said this earlier, and I forgot to mention it. My list of design decisions and patterns may not be the exact thing that you need to roll out for your organization. This is my reference architecture explanation of these things. But you may look at my design decisions and say, that number 4.1, that just doesn't apply to us. Okay, great. Come out, build your own custom version of this. What I'm trying to do is show you a framework for how you can put these things together. And then if you also look at the number of threats that each version mitigates, I think that's another powerful metric you can use to measure these things. And putting that all together gives you the ability to see your products and get this idea of a secure and private by design and default score for each individual release, feature, product, however you want to measure it in the dashboard.
All right. That's a lot to take in. People showed up for, I think, a high level, and we gave them a high level, but wow, there's so much here at this high level to take in. So get your questions in there. here as we are wrapping things up, and yeah, I have the questions slide. So everybody knows how questions work. I don't think we need to linger on this one. So I'll put your information back up so people can get there. As we're waiting for those final questions to come in, before I ask the final ones that I'm going to ask off of this list, and thank you very much for everybody that participated. Could you remind us like where we can listen to you? Or I know it's on the screen, but just remind us of how to best get a hold of you and read your ideas.
Definitely. So application security podcast, security table, threat modeling podcast, these are all different kind of takes. AppSec podcast, we're interviewing experts from AppSec, kind of breaking down and understanding how they work and what makes them successful. Security table is my friends Izar and Matt. We just riff on a particular topic. And then threat modeling podcast, I've been going on this journey where I thought I understood threat modeling, and I've found all these other angles people are using for threat modeling. And so I've been interviewing people and boiling those down into 5 to 7 minute kind of high energy episodes to help you understand different facets of threat modeling. And then we mentioned the reasonable application security newsletter. And then the other thing that I'll say is I've mentioned devici a couple different times about our threat modeling platform. We've got a free forever plan for people. So you can go sign up and use the devici platform to build up to 3 threat models forever and never send us any money, because part of my mission in life is to get more people threat modeling. Yes, I have a company that does threat modeling, and I want people to do this at a large scale in an enterprise. But I also want to do more. I want to see more people perform threat modeling and get into this discipline. So check out devici.com. You can sign up for a free account there and give it a try.
That was actually one of our questions: is how can devici help us implement this methodology? And I think you just answered it. devici.com. Sign up and start down that path with you to get into the specifics in the weeds.
Yeah, definitely.
Had a question a while ago, and it's a little bit in the weeds, but I still think it's a good question. This is all good, but what happens if you hit an essential open source library in your project that has a vulnerability, but there's no fix available yet? Like, how do you account for that in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's the danger of using open source, right? That's that we always focus in on all the benefits we get from open source. We get a component, has developers that are working on it that we aren't paying, and they're creating some cool functionality, and it's getting better over time. But this is kind of the deep, dark secret underneath open source, is that sometimes there's vulnerabilities that exist that don't have a fix for it. And what do? Well, you just have to keep building software. I mean, I've seen some organizations that are big enough where they'll actually go and fix the vulnerability themselves and commit and make it an open, obviously they're committing that code back to the according to the license, the open source license that comes with it. Most organizations don't have the ability. I know my startups, I've been in this situation before where I didn't have a fix for a particular known issue. And so I just had to filter it out, and I had to continue building software with it for a period of time until the developers, the creators of the component, fix the issue. And so I would say the way that I think about this is this is going to happen. There's nothing there's no magic wand that we can wave that makes this go away. What you have to do is you have to have a process in place to filter that vulnerability out for a period of time. And that's what I built in our build systems, just using a kind of a custom solution. Was we would filter out a known issue that didn't have a fix yet, but it always had a time limit in the configuration file, so that the filtering out of the notification and the blocking the build of it would time out after a period of time, so that we would then have to go back and look. So it was an automatic reminder at 5 days, 7 days, whatever we set it to. When the build broke, we would go and see, okay, is there actually a fix that's been created for this? So yeah, just know that this is just part of life. It's part of building software in an open source world.
That's life. Things happen. So pretty interesting one. Someone picked up on one of the examples you gave around colorblind UX threat. What do you mean by that? Like, what could that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's more of that's an example, Andy, of this is Andy's question of applying the threat modeling approach and methodology to things outside of security and privacy. And so when I think about UX, when I was talking about user experience folks being part of this process with us and being, building a secure and private user experience, I was more thinking of the angle where user experience is helping to move security and privacy forward. But I love the fact that you took this and you extended threat modeling beyond technology into somebody that's colorblind. Like that could be a challenge that we need to fix. Yeah, blue to green. Like, yeah, I mean, but they're also, now that Andy, you said blue to green, it's making me think there could be a potential threat in the user experience side, a security or privacy threat, where if we relied upon colors, for example, to help people make a security and privacy decision, and somebody's unable to see particular colors, they may make the wrong choice. They may make something. So I do see where you're coming from here. There are security and privacy tie-ins to that as well.
And thank you for reminding me. I forgot to say Andy's name, and I didn't thank Kamal earlier for his question. But we have a really good question from Paulo, I think, to go out on. Do you recommend any courses on threat modeling, or are there any that you particularly recommend?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for application security training from the perspective of developers and kind of organizationally, then Security Journey, my previous startup that I sold, is still one of the best places. I would say it is the best place to go, which has a number of different threat modeling courses designed for developers for different roles within the SDLC. And so Security Journey would be a place to go. But if you're I would say I mentioned Matt Nizar's book about Matt Coles and Izar Tarandash about threat modeling. That is not a course, but it is a very deep dive, but also a high level survey of lots of things in threat modeling. So I would recommend that. It's not a course, I know, but those are kind of the two places that I would recommend if you're going from an organizational perspective, or I would say just get the book, get Izar Matt's book and give that a read. And it'll give you a good foundation in threat modeling, which will then open your eyes to a whole lot of other angles that exist to it.
Well, before we get out of here, I just want to say for the future recording, people that can't see the poll, we asked that poll earlier about is threat modeling part of your organization's security strategy. Unfortunately, 37% said they hadn't thought about it yet. 23% said it is part of their AppSec culture. So that is promising, the number 2 answer. And then tied for third place is we're trying, not quite there yet, but it's a journey. Getting there is relative, and we'll get to it sometimes. We get to it sometimes, which means you're making the effort, which is good. But Chris, I want to thank you so much. This was so much information. We know we're going to get a lot of requests for the replay on this one. And thank you for everybody that joined us today, and join us next time for another webinar. We'll be back next month bringing you more great topics. But again, thank you, Chris. And everybody go check out devici.com and check out GitGuardian. Anna dropped a link earlier from one of our awesome publications we did. If you haven't seen that, we will drop that in the show notes as well. Can't quite find the post here. Anyway, but we did some AppSec modeling as well. So, all right, thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.
All right, thanks, Dwayne.